Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, sometimes you've just got to take your passion and make it happen, and if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast, where I sit down with a wide-ranging variety of entertainment industry professionals, and I pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and in a conversational fashion. And you know, if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to assume that you do, because let's face it, you're listening right now. And if you are, hit that subscribe button. Subscribe, give us the old 5-star rating on your podcast provider of choice. We're available pretty much everywhere, places like Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, and plus we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel, so if you can give us a like and subscribe as well, we'd really appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to check us out on social media. We're on the Facebook, we're on the Twitter, we're on the Instagram, we're on the TikTok, and we're on the Letterboxd for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large, because, you know, if we love to watch it and write about it and talk about it, guess what? We love it even more when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please, pay us a visit. You know, on this episode, we are taking it all the way back to 1983, because guess what? It is the 40th anniversary of Flashdance, which has just been re-released for the very first time on 4K. And if you don't know Flashdance, it's the classic story of a small town girl with an all-consuming dream to study at the Pittsburgh Conservatory of Dance. This 18-year-old works during the day as a welder and at night as an exotic dancer as she bravely pursues her dream and undertakes an unforgettable journey that reveals the power of her convictions. This actually is an Oscar Award winner because it won for Best Song, Flashdance-What A Feeling, from the one and only Irene Cara, and it's the film that discovered Jennifer Beals and put her on the map. And you know, this new 4K looks absolutely fantastic. In celebration of that, we had the unique pleasure of sitting down with the one and only Adrian Lyne to talk about the making of the film, this new remaster, and so very much more for this really entertaining piece of cinema. It's pure 80s. It's a little cheese, but it is of the time, and it is, again, at least to me, it's one of those movies of the 80s which is so emblematic of the decade, and particularly the music of the decade too. This is really in many ways almost a movie musical in many ways, but it still holds up and it's still fun. But if you haven't already seen Flashdance and you want to go pick up a copy on 4K, I do recommend you go do that. But first, enjoy our talk with Adrian Lyne, because between you and me, it's a darn good one. Adrian, obviously, first off, just thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate this.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Now, I mean, I'd love to find out, like, walk me through, I guess, that initial phone call of finding out that the film is getting remastered, obviously, in celebration for the big anniversary.
Yeah, no, I was pleased. I mean, I was pleased that you know that they're making it look better. That's good. And I saw the movie. Funny enough, I saw the movie a couple of days ago, and it wasn't as awful as I thought it was going to be. You know, I was quite pleased, and mainly about Jennifer. I thought she was really lovely in it. Really, I thought she was sort of had a vulnerable quality that made the kind of a little bit simplistic story work.
Well, I mean, that's kind of that. I think that's kind of why there's this magic to the film and why it has sustained. I mean, can you like even reflect back onto sort of the casting of her? Because I mean, I can imagine you had to go through a myriad of people to sort of settle on Jennifer.
Well, I saw loads and loads and loads, and then she came in and she hadn't done any acting. She had done a little bit of modeling, and she was very upset because she had lost all of her luggage, and I got her to cry because I wanted to see whether she could. But she just looked ravishing, and she was young. She was 17 or something. I mean, she just looked breathtaking, and she wasn't that good of a dancer. You know, she was okay, but she obviously that wasn't going to work unaided. But I rushed through I remember rushing through to Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simpson and saying, God, you've got to see this girl. She's marvelous. And so it started off like that. And, you know, we used a body double, Marion Yahan, to do the dancing. And it was funny because she didn't have the same sort of body. She was very petite and sort of a marvelous dancer, actually, and very sexy. So that sort of the combination of that on the one hand and this sort of vulnerable sweetness that Jennifer Beals had was an interesting sort of amalgam, you know, without people realizing it too much.
For sure.
I mean,
For sure.
I remember the studio was very anxious to sort of hide the fact. I remember, you know, that there was a body double, and the more they tried to hide it, the more people wrote about it, and so it sort of worked for the movie. Really, I remember that very well. That they were very anxious not to talk about it, and of course, then the journalists all want to talk about it.
Is it a little surreal to reflect back on this film? Obviously, it was only your second feature at the time, but I mean, it's had such a legacy over the years.
Well, at the time, I wasn't really anxious to do it. I turned it down twice. I thought it was a little silly, the story, and then ultimately I thought maybe I can do something with the dancing and give it some energy. But I think but finding Jennifer Beals was key, really, because as I say, she gave it a kind of a credibility, even though it was sort of thin. It was a fairer story, if you like.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Now, I mean, this is something I've been dying to ask you, just as a fan of some of your other work, because obviously you've done a lot of films that have dealt with sort of the duality of the sexes and people going back and forth. But then in the middle of all that, Jacob's Ladder kind of hits, which is not that kind of movie at all.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. No, I spoke to a lady called Tracy Jacobs, who was she was a literary agent. I said, have you read anything that is of any interest that you really like, you know, over the last 10 years? Have you read something? And she told me about this, because everything I'd read was awful, you know. And so I sat with Bruce Rubin for about a year, literally a year before shooting it, and just talking about, you know, I was at odds with him because I wanted to make the demons and the angels sort of flesh-based. I didn't want them to be mythic, you know, like we've, you know, like when he talk about Jacob's Ladder, I didn't want some sort of Liberace version, you know what I'm saying, of pillars and clouds and with the demons, again, I didn't want what one had seen before, you know, in say medieval paintings. I just wanted to. I used to call it that awful disease. God, I blanked on the name, but they were distortions of the body. So that when you, for example, when it said the nurse had horns, if they had literally looked like a bison's horns or whatever, it would have been hilarious. I mean, people would have laughed. But when you got, you know, when I managed to fix on those sort of bony things coming out of a skull that felt like part of a skull, and yet you could call them horns. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely, yeah.
Tougher to dismiss and not laugh about. That's what, you know, that's the key thing is for people not to laugh. If they laugh, you're fucked, you know, then.
Well, therein lies the rub. Absolutely. Yeah. Now, I mean, I'm kind of curious because just to start putting a bow on this, because I mean, obviously, when it comes down to like pop culture, I mean, the dance sequences are obviously go down in history as some of the more iconic sort of images that we've pulled out of the 80s. And I mean, is it sort of comforting or rewarding for you to see the work that you did with your cinematographer, you know, Don Peterman, just to really make sure that these particular moments look as good as probably they have since they were in the theater?
Well, what's funny is when people use the imagery, you know, like that wet dance, you know, that's been sort of been used. I mean, Jennifer Lopez did something with Dave Chappelle, a video based on the film, and there was another film recently that had bullets coming down rather than the water, golden sort of bullet. So that's very flattering that they copied. when I said I knew I wanted to do a wet dance, and I hadn't got the slightest idea really what, but I knew that if the water sort of flew off her body and went into the audience and drenched people, that would be funny. And also that her body would look good because it was wet, because it would be sleek and shiny, you know what I'm saying? And so I remember the studio were very skeptical about the idea of doing a wet dance. And so I had to convince the executives who were sitting on bleachers looking down at me. It was awful. They were looking, I was at the bottom with a girl, a dancer, and I remember winding a hose pipe around this poor girl, and there was no lighting or anything. And it looked like an unmitigated disaster. This was, I was trying to sell the idea of a wet dance, and it failed miserably, but managed to finally, sort of with trial and error, I managed to get it right in the filming. First off, I shot the wrong way. I was shooting towards a white background, and of course the water didn't show up. I mean, it's such an obvious thing. I mean, anybody could have told me, but I spent an hour shooting at a white background, and then I turned around and lit it with a follow spot, which made every sort of drop, sort of very sharp, and show up, and so gradually, made it work. And that particular moment, I remember I saw Bob Fosse, and who liked the movie a lot, and I was very flattered. And I said, I stole your lighting. And he said, I know. Funny. I stole it from Lenny. He used a follow.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, go ahead.
No, when I used that lighting and shot it towards a dark background, obviously it started to work, but it's fun doing. I know I've always thought that one should be, my job is a selector rather than a director. So you steal a little bit of, whether it's forgotten whether we talked about this. Yeah, we did, about that bing bong, that.
For sure, yeah.
Thing with Maniac. It's so great when you hear something and you steal it and you use it, or, I saw in a magazine called Twen. It was a marvelous magazine, a German magazine that I used to collect. And there was an interior with two blue light bulbs, and I remember thinking, I've got to use that somewhere. Those blue light bulbs are marvelous, and so I used that in that sequence, in fact. And it was another. That's what's fun. I mean, I used to love magazines. In those days, I would buy like 10 magazines a week, and rip out pages and stick them on the wall, and for things I should use, somewhere. And that's all gone now. Nobody looks at magazines. It's a pity. But now I look at Instagram, and it's the sort of same thing, really. Weird, right?
It's the beauty of that visual aesthetic, and I mean that's part of why I love the film. I mean, I think that's part of its legacy. I mean, I think, like you said before, just finding Jennifer is such a big moment of the legacy of this film. And I mean, I just want to thank you for the work, and I want to thank you so much for the time today.
It's a real pleasure. Thanks so much.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.